Welcome back to a second round recap of Down to the Wire. Again, alongside my NHL analyst, Nolan Thode. Nolan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Got a nice little full belly. I had some nice little lunch with Pat and another friend of ours. And, it's nice that the patios are back open. Seems like things are, we're on the right track once again.
Well, before we get right to the second round, we still have a first round series to recap. The Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs, as we remembered a couple weeks ago, they played their game 7 on the day that we recorded on Monday, and we couldn't unfortunately cover it. But yeah, so simply Montreal, as we all know, completed the 3-1 comeback. The Leafs somehow still don't have that killer instinct, even after being up 3-1 in the series, or even, being up 3-2 in a series against Boston a couple years ago. And, from what I was seeing, like Montreal seemed defeated after game 4. I thought I counted them out. I didn't count them winning game 5 and so on and so forth. And it seemed as though that Toronto did get outcoached by Dominic Ducharme, who's an interim head coach, doesn't really have the main head coach tag next to him. And, it's as we reflect back on this first round series, it's crazy how Montreal scratched Cole Caulfield and Jesperi Kotkaniemi the first 2 games of the series. And then, the Leafs, the story all along for the Leafs was that their best players didn't play like themselves. And obviously the Tavares injury made a difference. But even without Tavares in the lineup, Toronto still dominated. They literally got 3 wins without John Tavares, their captain, in the lineup. It was game 1 when he got injured that the Habs won. So, it's just so weird how this all ended up.
No, exactly. And I think, you look at the Tavares injury and sure, Toronto's not the same team without their captain, but, they lost that game 1 and it seemed, after the Tavares injury that, the bench, just the general morale of the Leafs, they were kind of out of it. And, okay, fair enough. Let Montreal win that game 1. But the Leafs team that we saw in games 2, 3, and 4, that was a solid team. That's the Leafs team that, we've seen all season, the best team in the North Division. Like this was a Leafs team that was expected to, at least win a series. It's crazy to think that they weren't even able to do that.
I agree. And, this was one of the historical seasons for the Leafs. We had Jack Campbell breaking the NHL record for most consecutive wins to start out a season with 11. And, Jack Campbell played better than Carey Price. So, when you say that and you see that the final result of the series was that Campbell's team didn't win, it's so confusing. And Toronto just up and down the lineup, they were better. But it's almost like the pieces that were added before the season, like the Spezzas, Thorne and Simmons didn't really do much, but it was mainly Spezza. And that's a problem when someone who's 37 years old is leading your team in points. Usually when you have a 37-year-old on your team, he's there to provide secondary scoring, not primary scoring.
No, exactly. And pretty much you look at this Leafs team and, as long as they have, the Tavares, Marner, Matthews, and Nylander contracts under their books, this is going to be the construction of these teams. They're going to have a lot of money tied up to their big guys, and their depth pieces are going to have to be, veterans coming in and taking, pay cuts to play for this team. And, you look back at the series and we've gotten, a couple of weeks to just kind of reflect on it. And I feel like people have really forgotten, not only were the Leafs up 3-1 in the series, however, in games 5, they came back from 3-0 down, forced overtime, couldn't capitalize. And then in game 6, they were down 2-0 down and forced overtime. The Leafs had a lot more opportunities than people give them credit to, close out this series. And, for Montreal, Carey Price had to play the way that he did. And, he was able to, pretty much get a shutout in that game 7. Nylander scored late, just a little bit of a pity goal. But, Carey Price, put the team on his back. And, the scoring wasn't there the first 4 games. They only had 4 goals in the first 4 games. And I remember people were just saying, this Canadiens team can't keep up with the Leafs. They're going to have to win these games, 1-0, 2-1 if they want to win. But, they were able to find their scoring in those games where they were able to come back, and, it resulted in them being able to, embarrass the Leafs.
Yeah, and it seems like the theme of the story for the Montreal Canadiens is basically Carey Price and how he has been tasked to steal multiple games when the offense isn't there. And when you have a player playing at the caliber that he is right now, really the shot to win the Stanley Cup seems to be as greater as the series goes on. And this could be Carey Price's last chance to win a Stanley Cup because of the way Montreal is built and because of what I think the future is going to hold for them.
Exactly. They have to take advantage of the opportunity being in the Final Four with Carey Price. They don't know if he has another run like this left in him. And, people wouldn't have even expected it this year. Carey Price is a great goalie, but there was controversy in the middle of the season whether or not he was the same Carey Price we know. And, some people gave up on him. I know you and I both didn't. And I think, the fact that he pretty much went a month without playing a game in the NHL up into these playoffs and came into game one and played 7 amazing games, like he didn't miss a beat. I think, all credit due to him. And, say what you want about how much he makes, but, it's series like this and games like that, that make, Carey Price a $10.5 million player in my eyes.
I agree. And let's move on to the North Division second round. The Montreal Canadiens up against the Winnipeg Jets. And, the Winnipeg Jets, they sweep the Edmonton Oilers and then they get swept. Montreal wins 4-0. And in game one, my buddy Declan was saying that if you mention the Scheifele hit, everyone knows what's going to happen. He has been hit like, he did get bulldozed a couple of times in his career, but when you say, okay, what'd you think? What's your opinion on the Scheifele hit? Well, everyone knows that we're talking about the Jake Evans injury. And I think it was dirty. And I think that he deserved the 4 out of the 5 game suspension. And, I think we need to put this into context that, he was assessed for charging. And as the rule states, there's no gliding in the rule. The rule states that, the 2 key words are distance traveled to violently check an opposing player, whether it's in open ice, up against the boards, or there's another term that I'm forgetting. But either way, he wasn't assessed for illegal check to the head. It was charging. And by rule, Scheifele built up the speed he had a lot of distance traveled, 150 or 200 feet away from the opposing player, and he violently checked him. I think that Scheifele is not a dirty player. This was just, I don't think this incident should tarnish his whole career. No. He is one of the more respectable players in the league. And funny enough, the Winnipeg Jets didn't put out a statement regarding Jake Evans' health, whereas the Montreal Canadiens did for John Tavares. So there's just something to consider there. And, it's crazy that because that was Jake Evans' first Stanley Cup playoff goal, and it was on his birthday. But that's for another day. And I just didn't like the hit whatsoever. I want to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you look at the hit and definitely the severity around it, Jake Evans getting hurt, and it maybe was just a little unnecessary. It was late game and Jake Evans was sort of tucking away an empty netter. And I think the big thing for me when I look at the suspension is, Scheifele was probably in a position to make a play on the puck and prevent Jake Evans from wrapping that goal around. But instead, he just kind of went for the big hit. He probably in his own head had written the game off and was just sort of trying to get a momentum boost for his team. But it ended up doing the opposite. And like you mentioned, the Montreal Canadiens pretty much just took the series from here on out. The Jets, without Mark Scheifele, 2 years in a row, it's been the story of their team. They looked terrible against Calgary last year in the play-in once Scheifele got injured. And now, he's being suspended. You look at this suspension and you look at the Kadri suspension, and you just got to figure that, these are the things that, maybe there's a little bit of less calls in the playoffs, the refs let a little more happen. However, with the major stuff like this and with the Kadri injury or with the Kadri suspension, maybe these aren't 4 to 8 game suspensions in the regular season. However, in the playoffs, it's just, there's no room for this type of behavior, in my opinion.
I agree. And I think the Mark Scheifele hole was too big to fill for the Winnipeg Jets. He's their leading scorer. And, when you don't have that available to you, he brings a lot to the team. And, now you're trying to score as a committee. And I just don't think that was in the Winnipeg Jets, plans. But I think with Connor Hellebach, we have to mention him as well. He played a phenomenal series. He was dialed in every night, giving his team a chance to win. I mean, in game 2, the final score was 1-0, and it was a shorthanded goal that got Montreal the win. Rarely do we see a 1-0 playoff win. Rarely do we see the goal scored shorthanded. And I think from my calculations, the Montreal's penalty kill outscored the Jets' power play. I mean, that's a stat. That's obviously not good. And obviously, I think the Jets' power play success does come from the absent or, power play dismissal, I should say, or, failures. That does come from the absence of Mark Scheifele. And, when you're facing a hot goalie like Carey Price, let's think back to the 2019 Blues. They have Jordan Binnington. Let's think back to, the 2012 Kings. They had Jonathan Quick. And the 2013 Blackhawks had Corey Crawford. Those are just examples of teams that had hot goalies, going into the playoffs and then making an insane run.
Yeah, exactly. And, back to the point where you talk about the Jets, and after Scheifele went down, it just seemed no one was able to fill that hole. You look at Pierre-Luc Dubois, they brought him in earlier in the season, and a lot of people were excited about him because, in Columbus, he seemed to have his game figured out, and, he was a top 6 forward. People thought him and, Scheifele were going to be the top 2 centers in Winnipeg. But, since coming to Winnipeg, sure, he's had flashes, he's had games, but consistency-wise, Pierre-Luc Dubois has just not been the same player. And in this series especially, he just wasn't able to step up when the team needed him to against, a Montreal team. He's from Quebec, so you figure, maybe he was able to rally some of that. But, he just didn't play a great series, and he admitted it. I remember seeing a post-series presser, and he was just talking about, he's not going to make any excuses because one of the reporters was asking him if he was playing through injury in the series. And he denied it. He said, I wasn't playing through injury. I just, wasn't good.
Let's move on to the West Division playoff series there with the Vegas Golden Knights and the Colorado Avalanche. Vegas would go on to beat Colorado in 6 games, 4-2. And personally, I look at this Avalanche team and, I see that they're dominant from the offense to the defensive part. And then, you had the Vezina Trophy nominee in Philip Grubauer. So given that, I thought the Stanley Cup this year was Colorado's to lose. However, I do believe that the winner of this Vegas and Colorado series is going to go on to win the Stanley Cup. And, both teams are deep. This series did not disappoint. It was exciting throughout. But in game 6 is really where Colorado fell apart. Their defensive game wasn't strong. They kept turning over the puck to Vegas. And, Vegas would capitalize. And, Vegas would always be up 1-0. Then it was 1-1. 2-1 and so on and so forth until they won the game. And when you're always playing behind in a game 6, in an elimination game, it's hard to muster any energy. It's so hard playing from behind the entirety of the game. And throughout the series, I thought that the power play was a struggle for the Avalanche. They didn't convert on the majority of their opportunities. And really, Nate McKinnon has to be headlined here. I think he only had 0 points in the last 3 games of the series. I'm not sure if he got a point in game 6, but, when you aren't performing up to, he got nominated for the Hart, I believe. When you're not performing up to Hart standards in the playoffs, that's crazy.
No, exactly. I mean, especially after this game, the game 1 of this series, it was, I think 7-1.
Yeah, 7-1.
It was just a complete blowout. And at that point, people really looked at this Colorado team like, there was no way they were going to lose. Could they even sweep the playoffs? And then, they won a little bit of a closer game too. But, as soon as the series went back to Vegas, they were able to, win that game 3, and it was crucial. If they lose that game, the series is completely different. Obviously, I think Colorado wins if they go up 3-0, but, Vegas wins a close game 3 where they score 2 goals late to win it. And all of a sudden it's a series, and, they were able to rally off of that. And, like you mentioned in game 6 with Colorado playing from behind, I think, a lot of their mistakes in that game 6 come from that. When you're playing from behind, everyone tries to be the hero a little bit. The desperation starts to come out, especially in an elimination game on the road. And, they were kind of just exposed in that element. And, Philip Grubauer, who was phenomenal against the Blues and good in the early series, kind of wore out as the series went on, and Vegas seemed to be able to figure him out. And, credit to Vegas. They're a phenomenally built team. And I just think, maybe they don't win the cup, but, Vegas has a real shot. And especially after beating the President's Trophy Colorado Avalanche, I think Vegas, should be the favorite in a lot of people's eyes.
It's funny because last year in the bubble playoffs, we had Alan Walsh release a photo of Marc-Andre Fleury getting backstabbed with the coach's name on the sword when Robin Leonard was taking the majority of the starts. And Vegas did okay. They didn't obviously win the cup, but they didn't make the finals. And, you know, it's weird to put that into perspective now because Marc-Andre Fleury is leaned on as the starter. And when Robin Leonard got game one, because I think Robin Leonard got game one simply because of rest and fatigue. And, you know, Marc-Andre Fleury, 36 years old, Robin Leonard's younger. So you go with Robin Leonard in game one. That's fine with me because you're playing on short days of rest. And then you lose 7-1. And next thing you know, you go with Fleury. You know, you lose a tight game two, but then you sweep the rest of the series. You win 4 straight with Fleury in the net. So there's just some perspective to add to that series.
Yeah, and, you know, especially after that backstabbing photo last year, who would have thought that, you know, 1 year later, you know, Fleury would be having another great playoff run and leading Vegas to potentially, you know, another Stanley Cup final. You know, with 2 elite goalies, Vegas has the option to, you know, roll with whoever's hot. And, you know, I agree with you. I think that game one was simply because of rest. You know, they came off of a 7-game series where Fleury was just incredible against Minnesota. And, you know, Leonard just was not ready for the playoff action, and it was a quick decision to go back to Fleury and the right one, and I don't think they'll be turning back to Leonard anytime soon.
Let's move on to the East Division playoffs with the New York Islanders and the Boston Bruins. New York won 4-2, and the Islanders right now are playing some of their top-tier defense. Barry Trotz, ever since leaving Washington, has 5 playoff series wins or something like that. That could be Lou Lamoriello's stat. I'm not too sure, but you know, I think Washington really messed up there and not keeping Barry Trotz, because now we're seeing just how well New York, you know, is playing right now. And you mentioned last weekend or you know, a couple of weeks ago in the first round series recap that people should be taking the Islanders seriously. This is no team to push over and say, all right, we're beating them in 5, we're beating them in 4. They're really, you know, sure, they play a really boring game, but it works. And as long as it works, they're going to continue with that. You know, and Rask, for the Bruins, you know, he was playing injured. The last 2 games really affected Boston's ability to win. And, you know, I thought the Bruins should have started Swayman in game 6, because when you're throwing an injured goalie out there, you're basically surrendering. You aren't giving your team the best option to win. And Swayman was playing phenomenal down the stretch. And, you know, he played, I think, 10 games this year. A handful of games, and it came at a point where teams were still competing for playoff spots. So it's not as though they were resting players or anything like that. And, you know, with Rask and his contract situation, he's a UFA, you know, right now, I guess we could say. So does Boston bring him back? You know, there have been rumors saying that, you know, dating back to last season or last offseason, will he retire? And if Boston doesn't bring him back, maybe they get Freddie Anderson, and maybe they match up against the Leafs in round 1. And next thing you know, Anderson beats the Leafs.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's so many hypotheticals you can draw from this year's UFA goalie class. Yeah, I think Rask, you know, just not being healthy is a complete X factor. You know, when the Bruins have been able to make their cup runs, you know, obviously they won with Tim Thomas in 2011, but in 2013 and 2019, Rask was probably the best player on the Bruins. You know, maybe you could say David Krejci in 2013 had a great run, but, you know, when he's playing at an elite level, you know, this is a really hard Bruins team to beat. And, you know, it was a 2-2 series. You know, it was at a point where, you know, Boston had an opportunity, but like you mentioned, in those last 2 games, you know, I think, you know, his injury was really apparent. He ended up getting pulled in game number 5. And yeah, the Islanders offense just sort of had their way. You know, going back to the point you make about Barry Trotz and, you know, Washington, I think, you know, Barry Trotz, you know, everyone's known him to be a great coach. However, when he was in Washington, people didn't give him as much credit as he deserved because there was the Ovechkins, the Backstrom, the Carlsons, you know, back when Holtby was an elite goalie. You know, people thought that Washington team was so successful just because, you know, they were a really great team. However, you look at them, you know, without Barry Trotz, and, you know, they're not as dangerous as they used to be. And, you know, with this Islanders team, you know, they lose Tavares in the 2017 offseason, and you'd think that, you know, they go into a rebuild. However, you know, the Leafs have 0 playoff series wins since the signing, and the Islanders have 5. You know, like you mentioned, it's just kind of crazy that happened. And I think the Islanders, you know, it's about time. You have 5 playoff series wins within the last 3 years, 2 semifinal appearances. They took Tampa to 7 last year. Dallas only took Tampa to 6. So this Islanders team, they're a real threat, and I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple months we're talking about them winning the Cup this year.
To further onto your points there, I think one line that's really been clicking for the Islanders has been the Beauvillier, Nelson, and Bailey line. That line has seemed to be, controlling pace of play whenever they're in the O zone. They're always controlling play in the neutral zone. They're doing really good defensive job, right? Probably Barry Trotz has been instilling that in their minds. But yeah, I think that line has been super dangerous for New York. And, they have that, I guess depth, right? We talk about Kyle Palmieri, who at the trade was a trade deadline acquisition, didn't really seem to pan out. But as we see with the playoffs, he's become a threat to score. Travis Zajac, again, acquired at the deadline. He scored the opening goal in Game 6 for the Islanders. That really opened up the floodgates for them. So they have, really good scoring threats on the offense there. And then you look at the defense. I mean, Scott Mayfield's been playing good. Adam Pellick's been playing good. And then we look at Ilya Sorokin, or do you go with Semyon Varlamov? Like, I could see this, New York and Tampa series being really good.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. I think it's going to be a great series as well. And, like you mentioned with the Bailey, Nelson, and Beauvillier line, this Islanders team, I feel like the reason that they get looked over is because, the casual fan will look at this team on paper and, there's no McKinnon or McDavid or Matthews on this team. But, they all play together very well, and, they're just well built. I think, the lines that they have, they mesh well. The chemistry is definitely there on this Islanders team. And, maybe they don't have it in them this year, but, they're missing their captain, Anders Lee, who's typically the left wing playing with Barzal and Eberle. And that's probably been their worst line of the playoffs. Barzal and Eberle, they've had a couple good games, but, from what we're used to seeing from them, it's definitely not the same. And it's the depth of this team that's carrying them, Pajot leading them in points, and just, everyone's chipping in small ways. And, it adds up, and this Islanders team is, able to find themselves playing Tampa.
One thing that I guess we should finally mention is the fans at the Coliseum. I mean, they are always rocking. They're chanting, they want Bailey to score. He only has 1 goal at home, I think, this entire playoff run. I was checking his stats just as to see why they were chanting Bailey and why they were wanting him to score. But the, Coliseum, Nassau Coliseum, has been rocking this entire playoff run. It's been so fun to see fans back in the stands.
No, absolutely. And, as much as the game, the fans, they're not on the ice playing the game. If the Islanders are at Barclays Center, are they in the conference finals? You know what I mean? I feel like these home games for them, when they're able to go back there, play in front of their passionate fans, it's just such an energy, and it gives them such an upper hand over the opposing team.
And yeah, I think we're finally, witnessing how fans can contribute. Like with this in the bubble last season, we didn't, it was so boring. Like, the viewing experience is just entirely different.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think, now that we're, in the Final Four, there's been speculation all season about what's going to happen. But luckily, all 4 teams that are, left in it are having some sorts of fans in the crowd. And, it's nice. And, for 3 of the teams, it's near full capacity. And then, with the Montreal Canadiens, obviously in Canada, there's not much you can do. But, it's just really nice to see these meaningful games, being able to, almost sell out and, just having these fans in there, just, the energy that they bring just adds so much more to the game.
Let's move on to our last series of our second round recap. The Tampa Bay Lightning going up against the Carolina Hurricanes, and Tampa Bay basically had their way. They beat the Canes in 5. The Canes really didn't stand much of a chance as Tampa controlled, most of the scoring. And, and obviously, the games were low scoring, which showed that Tampa can play really good defense. And it sucks for Carolina because, Nedeljkovic was playing, phenomenal up until this point. And, he's not at the stage of his career where you can rely on him to, win games. He was a rookie this year. And, when he did get the Calder nomination on the same day, he was showed the bench. So, it sucks to see that Carolina couldn't muster up any offense. And, when you're going up against Andrei Vasilevsky, arguably the best goalie in the world right now, it's going to be hard to win games.
No, I agree. And this Tampa team is just like super well built. I think everyone knows that. They won the cup last year, and a big part of it was because of their depth. When they won the President's Trophy a couple of years ago and got swept by Columbus, it was because they relied way too much on their top guys. And, now they're in a position where, their top guys are going to show up and, score the big goals when they need to. But, there's a lot of hockey where your top guys aren't out on the ice, and Tampa Bay has been able to, figure it out, maybe, finding a little bit of a loophole in the salary cap, but, they're able to ice this really solid team. And with Carolina, I think, the future is bright. They have the goalie of the future now with Nedeljkovic, and, lots of great pieces, but, with the roster that they have, you would have expected them to steamroll the Predators in that first round. However, it was a bit of a close series, and then they go in to play Tampa, and maybe a little bit shaky. Tampa's able to steal both games in Carolina, and I think it's really hard to come back from a series when you lose the first two games at home, and Carolina just wasn't able to ever have the upper hand in this series.
Now, I'm not sure. You probably saw this odd stat, but apparently Andrei Vasilevskiy has 3 shutouts, and they're all in like a series clinching games, which is kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the last 3 series, that the Tampa Bay Lightning have won this year, Game 5 against Carolina, the first round against the Panthers, and then in the Stanley Cup final, Vasilevskiy has had a shutout in those games that they've won. And when you think of Tampa, obviously you can't discredit Andrei Vasilevskiy, but this is a different team without Andrei Vasilevskiy. I believe him being an elite goalie helps them so much. When he's in net, they play so much better. In the games where Curtis McElhinney plays in the regular season, it's a different Tampa team. But when Vaz is in there, the players are just confident that he's going to make those saves, and it allows the ice to open up a little bit more, and for them to make these plays, and they just have a lot of success.
Well, let's move on to our Pagcast prediction segment, where I predict and you predict the Tuesday's game. So we only have one game on top for Tuesday. That's Game 2 of the Tampa Bay Lightning and New York Islanders series. And depending, Game 1 is happening in half an hour. So depending on Game 1, but for Game 2, it's going to be in Tampa Bay. I'm expecting the New York Islanders to take Game 2.
Yeah, I'll bounce off of today's game. I think, Game 1 in Tampa, I say the Tampa Bay Lightning, they're on a roll right now, and they win this Game 1. However, after losing Game 1, this Islanders team, knows how important it is to win that Game 2 and not be down 2-0 heading back to New York. And I think, I agree with you, and the Islanders are going to take the game on Tuesday.
Well, I'd like to thank again Nolan Thode for joining me on another edition of Down to the Wire.
It's always a pleasure, Pags.